You know, if there is one thing the anime community will never fail to do, it's misinterpret criticism. People's wants and expectations for an adaptation of a series will obviously never be universally agreed upon. If you were to question 10 different MHA fans on how they think a certain season should have been adapted, you'd most likely get 10 different answers. It's simply the natural flow when it comes to subjective ideas, but there are occurrences that the foundation of critiquing an adaptation tends to get lost in the sauce. Dandadan was the next big shonen that people were gauging their expectations for. With Yukinobu's art and craziness each week being tackled by Studio Science Saru, people were expecting an eye candy adaptation. It helped that Saru had a pretty good reputation already in mind for a lot of fans. From Devilman to Scott Pilgrim's anime, there was a lot of talk about creative freedom and really capturing that weird nature that is pretty consistent throughout Dandadan's story. Come these first two episodes, and I think that for the most part, people are very happy with the result. Between all the color usage with the encounters of the unknown and then the quirky banter brought to life, a good first impression has been instilled within the community, which was a little surprising because I was expecting a lot more controversy given, you know, obvious reasons. However, the praise for the first episodes once again put a certain sentiment back on my Twitter feed regarding Chainsaw Man's adaptation. Takes like CSM's adaptation is aging worse by the day and all that gist. To absolutely nobody's surprise, the first thing the average Chainsaw Man fan does is impulsively reply as if it were a gag reflex with a quick clip of good animation, because that'll sure convince him that suddenly the adaptation is good, thus leading to this back and forth that goes absolutely nowhere. Now, what I'm about to say may blow some of you all's mind, but an adaptation is more than just about the animation. I know, it's absolutely crazy, maybe even a little bit insane, but just hear me out, will ya? I like Chainsaw Man, and Fujimoto's approach as an author was a very different experience for me upon reading the story for the first time. It's not your clean-cut point A to point B storyline, and a lot of the nuanced beats are not directly laid out in front of you. On top of that, the series doesn't really hold back on what it chooses to portray. A lot of human behavior that people act immature about have value when it comes to characterization, and knowing how the story can go from badass to weird to heartbreaking, I couldn't tell you confidently how this story should be adapted. A mix of elements could require an adaptation that approaches content situation by situation. For example, with Bungo Stray Dogs' latest season, they adapted a flashback storyline, with it majority being in black and white to signify the way one of the main characters saw the world, only to return the color once he was given a new perspective. Creative choices like that can be arranged on a case-by-case basis, but if there is one aspect people toggled on, it's Fujimoto's love for cinema. It's in the one-shots, it's in Fire Punch, and it did carry over to Chainsaw Man as well. The consistent inclusion of it gave people room to believe that perhaps the anime might take a cinematic approach to telling the story, notably in those quieter and character-driven moments away from the chaos. For the sake of immersion especially, I understood where people were coming from, and looking at the anime, there was some truth to the idea in full effect. Even with the OP having a song that felt appropriate for the series, the majority of the opening is tied to different movie references as well, and within the anime, you could argue that the approach followed through. How camera angles are used, POVs, character animation, and subtlety, they're all talking points people had when discussing the adaptation. Combined with the pretty solid animation all things considered, you should expect a lot of praise, but that's where this conversation starts to differ. The so-called switch up on the adaptation didn't happen overnight. It definitely was slowly brewing even during the weekly airing, but the hype can drown out all the criticism come the first go around. I need people to understand that at large, the animation isn't what people are complaining about with this adaptation. There's this sentiment that because the animation was good, people are complaining for nothing. It's like saying people shouldn't complain about One Piece just because they drop insane quality. Newsflash, a lot of people hate the sound effects and we all still hate the fucking pacing. I mean, for God's sake, people were eating up Aki's weekend routine sequence. As I said before, Chainsaw Man has a bit of a range within it. One minute it could be calm, filtering certain noises, allowing a sense of immersion in the quiet, and next thing you know, it's going DEFCON 4. If there is one central complaint I've seen about the adaptation, it's the color choices regarding the atmosphere and how that plays into the environment. A common word to describe them has been mute. Sure, there's a lot of beautiful looking scenes, especially when close up, but that alone isn't enough to satisfy people's craving for a more visually interesting approach, which pulls us back into Dandadan. When we go back and look at just the trailer, the way way an array of colors are incorporated within each encounter, major moment, and even flashback really caught people's eye. It seems that every encounter between the spiritual or sci-fi creates this sort of domain expansion of a color that contributes to the atmosphere. In episode 1, we had the Turbo Granny tunnel turning red, the Serpo's ship interior being blue, and Momo's awakening being green. Episode 2 had the chase by the Flatwoods monster being completely grayed out, which also allowed certain elements to stick out from Okarune while using Turbo Granny's power via the use of red. This type of visual creativity is something I think people would have liked to see utilized within Chainsaw Man's anime, both in setting and when the action got rolling in its own way. This especially became a talking point when people started to reference back to how colorful Chainsaw Man's volume covers were. When you look at some of the dingy covers and notice how there is some variety between the colors chosen for blood in the organs, it gave the critique some room to be thought about. Now, I'm not saying that just because the volume covers are colorful, it's objectively the right way to interpret the series. However, these covers can be something used in discussion to open up avenues of creativity within the staff room. I mean, who's to say that a devil's appearance couldn't influence a form of atmosphere and color change that accommodates to the unique encounter present? Unholy beings in the mortal realm could easily be grounds to promote a visually distinctive choice depending on who we're dealing with. I'm just saying. But let's move away from the colors for a sec, right? There's also been talk about the style of the show and that the realism approach may have held it back. Many people brought up the idea of a different art style that could have loosened things up, and there also was a crowd that were not fans of the CGI, though that never really bothers me per se. Shout out the Trigun Stampede. There's a lot of interesting ideas thrown out there into the online world for discussion, and despite the critique being unpopular, I hope people realize that with so much anticipation for the anime, it definitely was gonna get its fair share. Over these past 5 years, the bar of quality for anime has made some serious strides, and naturally, that also invites more scrutiny and critique over how the final product turns out. We see all the time how people are so quick to clown on animation even in its best form, but for once, this conversation is more so revolving around the aspects that contribute to the anime altogether. It's a different change of pace, one that I think should be normalized rather than constantly talking about which series has the best cuts. I just hope people understand what we are really talking about here, because from what I've witnessed, it seems like the point goes right over people's heads. I say this all to say though, that at the end of the day, these adaptations go in two massively different directions. Out of all the things to get compared, I definitely didn't expect it to be these two series, but then again, when is anything shonen related not compared among each other? I think that season 1 of Chainsaw Man is liked enough to get people to come back for a second season. However, there is a crowd that while they may enjoy the adaptation, it is not ideal as it could be to them. I like to think that after every season of an anime, the staff like to take time and reflect on how they can improve. We saw how much of a massive upgrade JJK went through in the span of 2 seasons, and I can imagine that some major adjustments might take place for Chainsaw Man as well. Direction doesn't have to be set in stone for the entirety of an adaptation. MHA had a different director this year, and season 7 is raving to be the best the show has looked since season 2. These things happen, and some visions can be for better or for worse. Gotta keep in mind too that Chainsaw Man season 1's director has moved on to better things, and we still have no idea what this movie may be like, let alone what the long term will be like. Whoever fills the big shoes next for series director has a major role to fill, but for all we know, a lot of the critique could be remedied over the years. Only time will tell, but please people, use your heads when discussing this because you may surprise yourself. And most importantly, there is nothing to be gained from tearing down either of these adaptations, so try to remain constructive. With that, ladies and gentlemen, is gonna bring me to the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching, and let me know what you think about this debate in the comment section down below. Be well out there until we meet again in the next video.